through the ample open door of the peaceful country barn, a sunlit pasture field with cattle and horses feeding, and haze and vista, and the far horizon fading away. Walt Whitman, 1865.
There's a place on the North Fork of Long Island where you can still look out from the open doors of a peaceful country barn and see the far horizons fading across fields of grain and hay. It is the Hallockville Museum Farm, located on the historic and scenic Sound Avenue corridor in the town of Riverhead. It's a place where visitors can rediscover the deep agricultural roots we all share.
The eastern part of Long Island was really settled from New England and was culturally part of New England. The settlers landed in Boston and then came here in the 1640s. And so farming here was much more like in New England than on the other end of Long Island, where there was a lot of Dutch impact and cultural history. The farming in that period was almost entirely self-sufficient. Almost everything that was consumed on the farm was grown on the farm. Everything that they wore, everything that they ate, everything that they used to build their houses and barns out of, it was virtually all grown locally.
The Hallock family was part of the Great Puritan migration to New England in the 1630s and were among the first settlers on the North Fork a decade later. They soon began acquiring land in this area, but did not acquire the museum's oldest homestead until nearly 1800. The house and barn, both built by Reuben Brown a decade before the Revolution, would be home to the Hallocks for most of the next 2 centuries as they and their North Fork neighbors made the area the center of a prosperous agricultural community.
The principal crop, ironically, that was grown for the city market was trees. Most of the farmers in this area made most of their cash in the first part of the century from clearing the land, cutting it up into cordwood, and then shipping it to the New York market.
The Hallock farm prospered. The family gradually expanded the land under cultivation. Their barns and other work buildings grew rapidly, creating the impressive farmstead complex visitors to the museum marvel at today. They grew potatoes and raised sheep. They farmed with horses and accomplished most tasks by hand or with limited technology. They worked hard, but by dint of their hard labor, they lived well.
Potatoes in the period after the Civil War became more and more important. In the first half of the century, farmers maybe grew a few potatoes for local consumption. It had always been a crop, but not very many. After the Civil War, you begin to see records of 2 or 3 or 5, even 10 acres of potatoes. So you're beginning to get the growth of what became the dominant industry.
Towards the end of the 19th century, another change washed over the North Fork. Immigrant farm laborers from Poland and other parts of Eastern Europe, like Adele and Konstanty Czerkanowicz, who settled on one of the farms that is now part of the museum, found their way to this area. They were also hardworking and industrious, and before long owned most of the old Hallock family farms. And, like the Hallocks before them, they also left an indelible imprint on the area.
One theme we're going to come back to again and again is the growing impact of New York City and really the impact of New York City's growth. In the first decades of the 20th century, the period just before and just after World War I, the Long Island Railroad kept on increasing its service and putting in new branch lines and throwing them further out. And so for the east end of Long Island, most of that impact was the growth of markets. 2 things drove that the development of the potato industry. One was certainly the proximity to the New York City market, which seemed to be bottomless for that particular crop. And then the second was various technological innovations, both the fertilizing ones that allowed them to get reasonable yields and the technical ones that allowed them to plant and dig and cultivate and take care of potatoes with a reasonable amount of labor. west end of the island, you begin to get something quite different happening. It was physically the growth of the city. And so you start this progression of the gobbling up of Long Island farmland.
Fortunately, the mid-century sweep of urbanization did not reach the North Fork, and the area is still a center of agricultural production. The Chikanowitz family and their Polish immigrant neighbors continued to grow the Long Island potatoes that made the area famous, as well as cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, strawberries, and other vegetables for the New York markets. So many generations of Hallock family descendants had tilled these fields that the area became known informally as Hallockville. We still use this name today, even though most of the farms gradually passed to newer immigrants like the Naugles, the Polish-Lithuanian family that built the museum's 1930s hay barn, and the Chikanowitz family, who built our now restored Depression-era farmhouse. In the 1960s, major changes began to overtake this area. Miss Ella Hallock, then in her 80s, was the last of the family living in the old homestead. A developer bought the old Hallock and Chikanowitz farms and proposed to dredge a huge man-made deep-water port in our fields. Really just a mammoth sand mine in disguise. This was followed by the Long Island Lighting Company's determined efforts to construct more than a dozen nuclear power plants on the site. Fortunately, neither of these projects came to be. The land around the homestead sat largely quiet for another 2 decades while developers circled. Then, a remarkable public-private transaction with Keyspan Corporation resulted in preservation of all the surrounding farmland and the woodland beyond. Today, Hallockville has truly been reborn and is again a real working farm. Our cows graze the sunlit pasture field, our chickens fill the hen house, and our fields of hay, grain, corn, and potatoes still stretch to the fading horizon. Hallockville is a place where visitors of all ages can experience the lives once lived on these farms, where we can all touch our agricultural roots, and where we can find a true window on that simpler past that shaped us all.